It is my first indeed. Hopefully not my last. This is beautiful.
That's what we like to hear. What do you think so far?
It's stunning. It's stunning. It's warm. People keep saying it wasn't sunny, but I don't see any evidence that suggests the opposite. So it seems like a myth.
Things change quickly here. I thought maybe we can start our conversation about travel. You've been to a lot of places. Have you, I assume you must have felt some culture shock stepping off of a plane in some place and thinking, where am I?
That's every place. I feel like if you don't think that, you're not paying attention, you know? Obviously some countries are more familiar because you may have, you know, seen them on television or had an idea of them, but I think everywhere you go, it hits you with some sort of culture shock, some sort of moment where you realize your world is not the only world. And then when you've done it long enough, you start to get used to that feeling. You know, so now I'm waiting for the moment when I go, what is it? Is it the temperature? Is it the people? Is it the accents, the language, the food, the vibe, the way people drive? What is it?
Have you discovered Bermudas yet?
Yeah, well, I mean, in the little time that I've been here, I've realized that there really is not a rush to get anywhere. That's one of the main things I've noticed. Like, if anyone has been in a car accident, I'd like to know why, and how. I've never driven slower in my life. It was quite lovely, actually. It was really, really enjoyable being passed by cyclists on the main road. That was quite an experience, you know? But everyone's just like really chill. Like at the airport, everyone is relaxed and, you know, it's just like, yeah, they ask you a few questions and they give you a little pink form and you fill that out and then we were done. Like that's like just a difference right there. You know, in America, it's like very definite. You know, like you got your form, move, you done, next, move, here. Here we did the form, we filled it out, and they're like, what are you doing here? How long are you going to be here for? And okay, it's your first time, you have to come back, and here's the form, and fill it out. And then we stood there for what felt like 5 minutes, and then the person was like, we're done. Oh, you didn't tell us we're done. He's like, yeah, you can go anytime you want.
Can you take us back to when you first started at The Daily Show?
Yes.
And hadn't long been over from South Africa. Did you sort of feel like an outsider there? Especially when you kind of elevated to the role that you would ultimately have in 2015.
Well, I think I definitely felt like an outsider, predominantly in a new job. You know, luckily I'd been going to and from the US for a really long time. You know, the first time I went out to the United States to do comedy, I think was in 2008 or 2007. I went back again in 2010, you know, and it was a self-funded tour where I just went around the country learning what people were like in all the places that you don't normally get to see or go to. You know, so everywhere from Erie, Pennsylvania, El Paso, Texas, you know, all the way
Lovely
up.
places.
Yeah. Clearly you haven't been. Nashville, Tennessee, etc. It was an interesting mix of feeling what America was like on the ground. And so when I got to The Daily Show, it was really just, you know, me learning what it was like to do a new job in a new political environment, but it wasn't a foreign country to me at that point.
So in your line of work, do you show up at a job like that and you have to act like you belong in order to be successful? Or do you have to actually belong to be successful?
Well, I think belonging is a byproduct of time. You know, I don't think anybody inherently belongs. I think that's a misconception that we can have as human beings. You know, the only reason you belong, you know, let's say in Bermuda, is if you were born here because your parents spent the time. And so in essence, you've almost inherited the time that they've spent. That's why you have a sense of belonging. But it is still time. They raise you, and so you feel like you're from the place. Think about how many people have been born somewhere, moved somewhere else, and then when they come back, they don't feel like they belong at home. And that shows you that belonging is nothing but time. It's just time that is put in by yourself and the community that you're in to make you feel like you understand, you have an idea of the culture that you're immersed in. And so for myself, I never tried to act like I belong. I just worked on belonging. I put the time in. You know, I knew initially things would be strange. You know, the first thing's always your accent. So you spend a lot of time explaining words that you've said, and people go, what are you saying? What are you saying? What are you saying? You know, like when I say like a pawn shop, That's where you like give, you know, people come with like old items they would either like to trade or sell or.
Yeah, I see.
Yeah, and then
two ways to spell that word.
Exactly. And then my American counterparts were like, "You went where?" I was like, "Oh, there's a pawn shop." And they were like, "Wow, okay, that's an interesting." And then I realized what they thought I was saying. So those are just small moments. Those are small, and I think belonging is just that. Because now, if you speak to the people who worked with me for 7 years and who I got to work with for 7 years, they understand me as much as I understand them, and I think that's created a different type of belonging.
So when you are a part of a community, a social community or a professional community, is it incumbent on all of us to make someone new into the community feel like they belong? And if so, how do we do that? Because of course, sometimes we also have unconscious bias that can show its head, even though we didn't intend to offend.
I don't think sometimes, always. We always have bias. We always have an unconscious bias. You know, that's how the human brain works, and it's not necessarily a bad thing. Bias is merely your brain having a preconceived notion of what is going to be, or what has been before defining the future. That's all bias really is. And so I think we all have to accept that we will have it in some way, shape, or form. You know, it's not always nefarious, it just is. And so when you ask the question, do we have an obligation to make people feel welcome when they come into a new community? I sometimes think when answering those questions, even for myself, to go to the root of the why. You know, why would you want them to feel welcome? Why would you want to feel welcome? How does it benefit your community if they feel welcome? And I think time and time again, you see the effects of a welcoming community versus one that is not in many countries around the world, where groups of people came in either for work or they were brought in through any other type of migrationary force. And you see in places where they were welcomed, they've become a part of that community. They've infused themselves. The community has slowly bled together where, you know, languages and cultures have now sort of immersed into one larger idea. And over time, it does mean you get you almost get a culture that is in many ways dissolving into another, which some think is bad, but I don't.
Right. Like an evolution.
Yeah, it genuinely is an evolution. And then you look at places where it hasn't happened. And what do you always find? You find fringe communities, you find outliers, you find groups of people who have been isolated, who feel like they do not belong, who feel like they have no path, they have no way to move into the group that is. And oftentimes that's where we start to see conflict, we start to see strife, we start to see an otherness that forms. And so while it's not always easy to welcome everyone, because I think you're engaging in a compromise. In order to welcome somebody, you have to extend your hand metaphorically, you know? And what you're doing metaphorically is you're letting go of your ability to hold yourself, and you're putting yourself out there. They have to do the same thing. But what that means is you compromise something, you've given up something, you've sacrificed a little bit. And so I think there is a little work, but the reward on the other side is that you are now joined to somebody in a way that you weren't before. So my honest opinion is yes. You know, I think it makes a world of difference. It makes your community different. Like in South Africa, where I grew up in the township, everyone knew everyone. You know, you walked past everybody's houses, you said hello to them, everybody knew everybody's names. So if you know someone's mom was coming back from the supermarkets and she was carrying a lot of groceries, didn't matter who saw her, we would help because we all knew her. And she knew all of us, and it wasn't even us trying to be chivalrous, it was just like, yeah, that's like our mom, so let's go and help. You know, and more I feel like, especially as Western culture takes over the world, you start to see a world where people go, oh, that's my neighbor, but I don't really know them. And so even if they're carrying everything, I mean, I'll let them carry it because they're just my neighbor. You know, and I think that's an attitude that over time makes us feel a little more lonely than we need to when we're actually in the communities we thought we weren't.
Speaking of that feeling of loneliness, I think all of us experienced that to some degree during the pandemic. You were such a refreshing voice, Trevor.
Thank you.
I think you saved a lot of people from insanity. But also during the pandemic was the death of George Floyd. And it seemed as if the way the United States responded was an extra focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion. But I think now we might be living in a time where the pendulum is swinging in the other direction. We see real big resistance to the idea of DEI. What's your take on what's happening now, politically and culturally, as it relates to that specific issue?
Well, I think, whenever we talk about diversity, we again have to ask ourselves how we're having the conversation. One of the most important things you'll learn in any type of communications class, I remember my cousin studied corporate communications in South Africa, and I didn't go to university, but I would sneak into his classes because I liked hanging out with him just, during break time, as we called it. And so I would spend a lot of time in these corporate communications classes that I wasn't supposed to be in. And because I'm waiting, I'll just listen to what they were saying. And I was always intrigued by what communication fundamentally means. It's the passing of a message and the interpretation of a message. And I think that's something we take for granted oftentimes. We think that the intention is all that matters and the reception does not matter at all. When in fact, a failed reception means the communication itself has failed. I mean, the same goes for, computer science. When you're sending a packet of information, you can send it successfully. If it isn't received successfully, then the data is corrupt. And so when we think about these ideas, we think about it through the lens of something like diversity, equity, and inclusion. Oftentimes I feel like the messaging falls because people aren't properly explaining what they're trying to do. To many people who are the in-group, it can sound like people are saying to them, hey, we're going to replace you. It's time for you to get out. It's time for you to be out, right? And then to other people, it can sound like they're saying, oh, this is a token program where people are going to be given some sort of leg up or some sort of bonus. When in fact, what you're saying is, hey, we notice that there have been many structural problems in our societies that may have kept people from achieving the equal opportunity needed to get into certain positions or jobs. What we're going to do now is try and widen our aperture to make sure that we're catching all of these instances. We're trying to make sure that everyone has an opportunity. And so I often think to myself, I liken it to accessibility. I'm eternally grateful to disability advocates who have taught me about how much we've benefited from things that you would have thought were specifically for disabled people, whether it's escalators or elevators, all these things. You're an able-bodied person, you living a fine life, you're doing your thing. You don't even realize how many stairs there are until you are incapacitated, until you're in a wheelchair. And then someone with a wheelchair comes along and says, I can't get into this building. Now, they didn't do anything wrong. You didn't do anything wrong. You didn't know that they were blocked from entering the building. But if entering the building is the only way that they could apply for a job, how do you then say that that person has equity? How do you then say that this person is included? You cannot, because you've designed the building to be accessed by yourself or people who are like you. And again, I don't assign blame, I just be aware of it. And what did we design? We designed ramps, right? And that gave people access. And then all of us able-bodied people, we love using the ramps, we can't deny it. Right? And so everyone benefited.
And to the point you were making about messaging, I suppose if there's a way where the discussion around race can show benefits in the same way that discussion did around disabilities,
right,
some of those people who have the resistance to it would hear the message differently.
Yeah, definitely. I think there's also this strange zero-sum game that happens in business a lot of the time that is only applied on one side of business messaging and not on the other. So people will always talk about growth. We need growth. Growth is needed. You look at countries that don't grow, look at what's happening to them. Whether it's Japan, whether it's Germany, you look at how their populations are slowing down, they're stagnant, and they go, we need growth. Where do we get growth? They've had, Japan specifically has had an exclusionary mindset for a long time. It helped them in many ways, but now it's starting to hurt them with an aging population, etc. They need growth. And so everyone acknowledges that. You go, you need growth. But then at the same time, if you say, we're going to grow by bringing new people in, people are like, whoa, where's the space for them? And so you realize it's all about your messaging and how you make people feel. And so in some ways, I think to myself, the human brain doesn't change much from the time we're children. Not on a scientific level, but I think on a human level. And I think of how different parents communicate the idea that a new child is going to join the family to their child. I think of it like that. Some parents do a really good job of acknowledging the fears and concerns of the existing child, because all the child hears is there's a replacement coming. You know, you go, hey, mommy and daddy are having a new baby, and you're like, oh, so I'm unemployed now? And the parents go, no, we still love you. No, we love you. And it's like, oh, but there's a new baby. So I'm the old baby. It's like, no, it's not like, no, there's more than enough love for you. And the child might even go like, okay, but you'll love me less. And the parents are like, no, we love you equally, you know? And the kid goes, okay, well, can I get more parents then? And the parents go like, no, it doesn't work like that. And the child goes, well, it seems like this is, I've literally seen children have fights with their parents. I'm sure some of you in this room have experienced that. The child will say, I hate this, I don't want a little brother, I don't want a little sister, I don't want this, I want to be alone. And if you address their fears, if you address their concerns, if you don't make it seem like they are idiots for feeling a very human emotion, and you want to communicate to them, they can be the first ones standing with their arms wide open when the new baby comes home, because they go, I'm getting a teammate, I'm getting someone who's going to help me, I'm going to get someone to throw the ball with me. Every time my parents are bored, I've got someone who's never bored, etc., etc., etc. And so I think when selling ideas, if we're truly trying to sell them, we have to understand that the other person has to acknowledge or feel like they are in fact benefiting as opposed to them losing out, which is a very human emotion to have.
Anybody else have a light bulb moment when he was describing that? Who has read Born a Crime?
Oh, thank you, wow.
Well, it's a big club. More than 1 million of those books sold, Trevor.
Yes.
Not bad.
Yeah,
it's like the Bible.
It's very far from the Bible, but yeah, no, it's been a blessing, honestly. It was a surprise. I never expected it.
Yeah, it's a joy to read.
Thank you.
We got to meet Patricia in that book, your mother, of course. Part of what we were due to discuss today is resiliency, and in that context, I thought of her. The way she survived the gunshot, dealing with the culture wars in your community. Was it intentional to show her as a character who exhibited that kind of trait?
I think my intention when writing the book was to be honest. And so I was really happy that my mother was pleasantly portrayed, because that's who she is and that's how I see her. She's not perfect, she's flawed as a human. I think I present that as well, and we all are.
Yeah, she threw you from the van.
She loves to say that she encouraged me to get out. She encouraged me. She's always like, oh, I think you exaggerate that story. She's like, no. Then I'm like, I have the scars. Why would I have scars from something that, like, this was a fast-moving vehicle. This wasn't in Bermuda. This was like, we were like really going quickly when she pushed me out of the vehicle. And it was to save me, but still, And so yeah, when telling the stories, I didn't intend to tell a story where my mom's a hero. I'll be honest. I thought I was writing my book where I'm the hero, because we all are the hero of our own stories. And then when I got to the end of it, I realized I was like, no, I'm just a punk ass sidekick, and I'm fine with that. I think a lot of the journey was her heroics, and I'm reaping the benefits of her work. And so that's the story that I told, which wasn't intentional, but that's what it came to be.
Tell us that Lupita Nyong'o will still play Patricia in the movie.
Yeah, right now we're still on for that.
We're all gonna go see that. Yeah, please. Thank you very much. You talked about being intentional, about being honest in the writing of that book. Did you also have to hold back things for fear of the criticism that might come for telling that piece of you?
There was a moment when I was writing my book where I had to stop. I just stopped. It was myself, the publisher, the publishing company, my editor, and I just had to stop because I was afraid. You don't realize how many parts of yourself you've kept hidden until you are telling your story. And I think that applies to all of us. We're so invested as people in portraying a perfect image of our lives, whether it's our families, the way we were raised, our relationship with our parents, our relationships with our siblings, spouses, partners, whatever it may be. We are so afraid of being judged for not having perfect versions of that we all walk around with these masks that hide a very real thing that everybody's experiencing. you know, and so I got to that position. I was writing, and I realized, like, I can't tell people this. This is, you know, it's embarrassing. I'm embarrassing myself. I'm embarrassing my family. I can't do this. But then I realized I can't tell my story and not share that, because then you won't truly understand who I am or how I am. You know, if I introduce myself and leave out those components of myself, then in many ways you won't understand why I think the way I do, why I believe what I believe, why I exist the way I exist, and then the story falls apart, and you wouldn't even know why. You'd read the book and you'd go like, huh, all right, this was an interesting story. This guy's born in South Africa and then went to New York. Whatever, what a strange book. That's it. You know? And I was scared, and I decided to make the choice. Spoke to my family, you know, spoke to my mom. I didn't surprise anybody in that regard. I said, you know, this is what I'd like to do, and we did it. And surprisingly, the exact opposite thing that I feared happened, which was people would come up to me and say, hey, I lived in a home of domestic abuse. Thank you for talking about that. Hey, I didn't know how to deal with race and identity. Thank you for talking about that. Hey, racism is a big issue where I come from. Thank you for speaking about that. And all of a sudden I found there were so many people around the world. I thought it was such a specific story to where I was from and how I was. It was insane. Till this day I will meet people who come up to me and share something that I thought of was a little ball of shame that I had to keep in myself. And now, well, you know, I'm liberated from it. Now I find it is part of my journey. It's part of many people's journeys. And you know, one of my favorite quotes that I ever heard was someone saying, you know, no one's responsible for what has happened to them. What you are responsible for is how you respond to that. You know, you can't control how you were raised, what your parents did to you, the world you were from, the country you're from. You can't control any of that. But there is a point in your life when you're old enough and you have enough control that you can now decide to start picking up the pieces. And it requires a lot of forgiveness. It requires a lot of patience, because essentially what you have to do is let go. You know, you have to let go of what you feel people owe you because of what they've done to you, and you just have to try and pick it up for yourself. And that's been a beautiful journey for myself, learning from the people who actually read the book, because I didn't think that was a lesson I was teaching, and in fact it was something that I learned from people who engaged in what I created.
The book was obviously an unqualified success. Do you find generally most of your lessons come from the things that are successful in your life, or from the things that actually are the opposite of that?
Most of my lessons? No, I think every single lesson, almost every single lesson in my life has come from a failure, you know? And when you think of life through that lens, it becomes a lot more enjoyable, surprisingly. You know, you start to see the world as opportunities as opposed to obstacles. You know, so everything out there, every single thing that happened to me in my life was some sort of failure or some sort of setback or some sort of, you know, obstacle, something that I didn't want to happen to me. But resilience can only be created through some sort of struggle, unfortunately. I mean, it's the very same thing the body does. You know, when you work out, the reason your body becomes stronger is because it realizes that it's going through some sort of adversity. You know, the more you run, the more your lungs go, all right, we need to produce more oxygen. We need to get more efficient at this. The more you lift weights, the more your muscles tear themselves and go, all right, we need to grow, because clearly there's more stress on this body than we thought. And that's an interesting element of being human, is that it's the stress that you put on somebody that then makes them stronger. The balance, though, is trying to find a stress that puts you in a zone where you can still grow, as opposed to it hampers you, right? You know. And so, I've definitely learned. Every single failure of mine, every single failure is the underpinning to some sort of success. You know, every joke that I've told that didn't work is the reason the joke does work somewhere else. That's how comedy works. That's, you know, so. It's fundamentally, I'm in a career where it's like 95% of the things I do is a failure, and then I'm living on the 5%. In many ways, it's like mining.
It can't be 95.
It is. It's like mining. I promise you, it's just like mining. Think about when they go mining. Most of it is dirt. If you're a successful miner, you're lucky if it's 0.01% of what you're digging up that's actually worth something. Most of it is dirt. Dirt, 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 dirt. Diamond, no stone. Dirt, 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 more dirt, diamond. Ah, we made it. Success. Yeah, but most of it is that dirt. Now, if you think of the dirt as something that's not supposed to be happening, then you're having a bad time. You know, what are you doing? I'm digging up dirt, as opposed to I'm looking for diamonds. Part of looking for diamonds is you're going to have to dig up a lot of dirt. And so it's not easy. I'm not perfect at this, by the way. There's a lot of the time where I find myself going like, man, there's so much, this went wrong, and that's terrible, and this happened, and that happened. But I can catch myself. When I'm really going through it, I can catch myself, and I go, okay, how do you turn this obstacle into an opportunity? So, okay, your commute has gotten longer, and you're frustrated, you're spending a lot of time traveling. Oh, this sucks, this is terrible, I'm not at home, I'm not here. Okay, what can I do with this time? And then I go, well, I'll try to learn a language, you know? And so then all the time that I'm not somewhere, I no longer think of as not being somewhere. I think of it as it's language learning time. And so, you know, whenever there's a journey, like on the way here, at the airport, it's like, how long? And they're like, 30 minutes. And I was like, okay. Like, well, I guess that's 30 minutes for me to practice a language. And that's how I see it, you know? So it becomes an opportunity to do something else.
What language are you learning?
Spanish. Yeah, estoy aprendiendo español. Pero no mucho.
Okay. Let's go back to the pandemic briefly.
Something I can participate in.
Did you know enough to look out for your own mental wellness during that time? Or were you surprised the extent to which maybe none of us were really caring for that part of ourselves?
The pandemic was really strange for me in that it forced upon me a certain type of self-care that I hadn't been affording myself for a very long time. The pandemic came down, you know, we all remember, right? It was that Friday, March 13th, 2020. That's when like really the world shut down. And everything stopped. You know, they said it would be 21 days. It seemed like it was gonna be fun. and then very, very quickly we realized it wasn't ending. But what I noticed was, all of a sudden, I found myself being in ways that I hadn't been for a very long time. I was spending time with my friends. You know, I was sitting down and having conversations. I wasn't always on the go. I wasn't always rushing to do something. I wasn't always worried about the next thing at all. You know, and it hit me like a truck. I remember there was a moment where I sat and I was like, when was the last time I just sat in the now? I didn't think about what's next. What am I going to do? What can I do? What should I do? What do I want to do? It was just like, what am I doing? What am I experiencing? Who am I experiencing it with? That's what happened to me in the pandemic. And then I also realized the biggest thing that we were all struggling with wasn't everything that we thought we would struggle with. You know, we weren't fighting because we couldn't go to a cinema. We weren't stressed because we couldn't travel no, we couldn't see people. You know, we couldn't interact in the same way. And everywhere around the world had different types of restrictions, but everywhere in the world, that was a common feeling. It was all of a sudden you couldn't be with the people who gave you your community. And I always think, you know, there's only 3 things you need to survive: food, water, community. That's it. And the pandemic robbed many people of that. But I was lucky that, you know, I just had to happen to live in the same building as one of my best friends who came with me from South Africa to work on The Daily Show. And so now here we were in a building together. We worked every day, but now we were really like living every day. We would take time to eat lunch, and we would spend evenings, and we'd go for walks, and this is life. You know, this is life. It wasn't spending time thinking about what the next thing I was going to buy was going to be, or, you know, what money I needed to earn to get something else. No, it was just life.
Did that pace that you learned during the pandemic sustain after the pandemic was over?
No, it's slingshots it the other way. No, because remember, this is what happened in the pandemic, is they tricked us, remember? So, you remember how it happened. First it says pandemic, then they were like, no one can do anything really. And then someone was like, there's this thing called Zoom, right? And then we were like, oh, this is wonderful, little did we know. And then Zoom became our lives. And then very quickly, I was working more at home than I worked when I was at the office.
Oh my God, everybody in this room can relate to that. Like where you look up and you're like, it's 7:30.
Yeah.
And I haven't eaten.
Yeah.
And I'm still in front of the computer.
Yeah. And the thing we don't realize was we had also robbed ourselves of the moments in between. You know? Like we became super efficient. Now it was like 8:30 meeting, 9:30 meeting, 10:30 meeting. There was no space between. The meeting ended, you hopped off, hop on, hop off, mute, unmute, mute, unmute, camera on, camera off, hop on, hop, wrong room, sorry, can you let me in, hop in, hop off, hop. That's all we were doing. We take for granted how most meetings in real life, you sit down, how are you? How's the family? Hey, I haven't seen you in a while. Did you see this thing? What did you watch today? This is the human side of what we are doing, because we're living. You know, I hate it whenever people say like work-life balance. No, it's life. It's just life. It's just a life balance, because that's all you're doing is you're living. It's not like you can stop living when you go to work. You know, at the end of it all, when your life is finished and they're putting you in a coffin, they don't give you back what you did at work. That's it. It's finished. You spent it. And so
we were tricked.
Yeah, but like part of, and then that's when I realized, I was like, wait. Part of working is I'm living actually. So in this environment, what am I missing out on? So I took for granted, like many of us did, that a meeting had little moments of enjoyment, little silly moments that weren't all about the work. You know, that it ended with somebody saying, what are you doing this weekend? Oh, I'm gonna do this. Oh, you should go check this. Oh, you should do, I'd love that. That's a conversation, that's a connection. Walking past someone in a hallway, catching up with someone in a parking lot, those unexpected moments of magic that make life what it is. And now it just became super efficient. I was working more than ever. I was more efficient than ever. It's like everything was happening on cue. And I didn't understand why I was becoming unhappier than ever. You know, at first it seemed like fun. Oh, I can do all my meetings, I don't need to leave home. But then I realized, yeah, there was no unpredictability. You know, and life is always that constant balance. You know, as the amazing therapist Esther Perel always says, she says, life is a constant struggle between desire and security. You know, that's what we're always experiencing. And what we got robbed of in the pandemic, ironically, was in the beginning it was no security, we're all panicking, we're scared. And then at some point it was all security. This is gonna be your life every day. This is you every day. And all of a sudden it wasn't fun now. Because you, no pants, Zoom. Every day, you knew.
Yeah. And then when we had to put the pants on, they didn't fit anymore.
Exactly.
Let's talk a little bit about community. And I wanted to start just on an observation I was just making myself on my way here today. I live in Boston. There's a huge pride parade in Boston today. They're expecting 1 million people to be spectators along that parade route. But I guess I'm also curious on your thoughts about Black communities when it comes to the LGBTQ plus community. Mm-hmm. Maybe it's true in Johannesburg, it's certainly been true here in Bermuda. Black communities have been a little slower than some other communities to be embracing of this community. What are your observations around that? And maybe even what some of the impetus behind that might be?
Look, I'm not an expert in the field, but in the little reading, research, and speaking to experts that I've done, I've come to realize that we need to reframe a lot of our thinking when it comes to this. Not that it's not true, by the way. I think there is no denying that many Black communities around the world have an adversarial or unfriendly relationship, unaccepting relationship with members of the gay, lesbian community extended, you know? I think there's no denying that. However, when you read your history and you look at it, you can't deny that a lot of this is a vestige of colonialism. You know, you look at how many places had a different understanding of everything that we consider sexuality today. You know, every way we consider it now, there were many tribes and cultures around the world that just accepted it in a very different way. Whether it was, you know, Native Americans in the United States, whether it's Africans, whether it's people flowed. There were some people who were accepted as having a gender that was fluid, or they portrayed themselves, or they presented the way they wished or didn't, etc. And it was in many ways condemned. You know, a lot of the stories that you read, you know, whether it was like Spanish colonizers, Portuguese, English, whoever, and you look at like that blanket of like that big church blanket at one point, it came in with a very judgmental attitude, and it told people that they were condemned for living like that, you know, and then the people were indoctrinated, and you can't deny it. Black people around the world have adopted religion in a way that is oftentimes surpassed now the people that taught them that very religion. You know, and so if you go to Europe now, religion is dwindling, it's fading away, it's disappearing. You know, in the Scandinavian countries, in the UK, it doesn't matter where, religion is slowly going down. One of the few places where, you know, Christianity, religion, and the church are going up is places like Africa, where people have held on to it, steadfast. And I grew up in a very religious family, so the one thing to understand about me is I don't have anything against religion. You know, I've always had a problem with what some people will use religion to do. You know, that's the problem that I have. And so when I look at these conversations, I think to look at them in a vacuum doesn't give us a full understanding of the whys. You know, it becomes easy to then go like, oh, black people are moving slower. It's like, no, I don't think they are, if you look at the timeline. Because if they were indoctrinated into being homophobic later on, then in their timeline, they're merely further along this way than the counterparts, you know, who are white, who were homophobic before them. So I don't think black people are moving any slower. You know, I just think that now, you know, people who are in charge of media, people who have a lot more power, they have become accepting, and so now they're the ones who say, oh, it's time to be tolerant. But they moved just as slowly when they were in charge. And so I'm not saying that justifies it, I'm not saying that's where I want to be, but I do acknowledge and understand how powerful believing something is. You know, I grew up in a very homophobic community, and not even from a place of hate. You know, there was no one who was like, we're hating, we truly believed. You know, we'll pray the gay out of these people, we're gonna help them, you know, because this is an abomination, but it's not their fault, we're gonna help them. I believe that myself. And then over time, through contact, through knowledge, through meeting people, you realize, you're like, well, I mean, it seems like you're trying to get rid of something that has existed since humans have themselves, and so maybe the problem isn't the problem, it's the acceptance of the people that seems to be the problem. And so in that, what I've come to understand is you won't beat anyone over the head and force them to accept other people, but what you can do is slowly build an environment where people, either through contact, through information, or even through entertainment and media, slowly feel like they're not you know, that they're not threatened, because oftentimes that's what it boils down to.
I feel like in your time at The Daily Show, you were very deliberate about listening well to views that were different than your own. And I know you've often encouraged people that when they disagree with someone, to actually listen harder, not listen less. I think Joe Rogan is one of the people that you mentioned that about, but others as well. Why do you kind of live by that ethos, especially when we live in a time where everybody seems to live in an echo chamber?
Well, I think it's because fundamentally, first and foremost, I think everyone is trying to be understood. Everyone wants to be understood, you know? The second part of it is, how do you disagree with somebody if you do not understand what they mean? That's maybe the biggest one for me. I can never say I disagree with you if I don't understand you. Then what I'd rather say is I don't understand you, and then I'd need you to explain it again and again and again and again. But if I truly understand you, then I can disagree with you. But in that understanding, I have to, in some way, shape, or form, have either a sympathy or an empathy. I have to see you as a human being and acknowledge that you believe that you are right from your point of view. I think that's one of the hardest things to do as human beings. It's one of the hardest ideas to possess. But we're so confident that we're right all the time. We're just so confident. And then you travel somewhere and then they do something completely differently. And maybe that's what shaped me, is I grew up in a country where there are 11 official languages. So even then, it's like, so even saying something, there's not one way to speak. There's not one way to sound. There's not one way to dress. So what's right? And then you start traveling. Now people are driving on the other side of the road. You know, now people are just doing things in ways that you've never encountered before. But it's right. But you go, no, this is wrong. Who says it's wrong? It is just not how I've learned it. And so when it comes to hearing people out, look, I think we're at a disadvantage because I think now with social media, it's not that it's created something new, but I think it has magnified and amplified something that has always existed in human beings. And that is a general resistance to a new idea or to a perceived enemy. You know, back in the day, it would take you a long time to meet somebody who doesn't sound like you, doesn't look like you, doesn't think like you. And oftentimes, by the time you met them, you had been on such a voyage that you yourself had changed along the way. Social media has erased that. You know, now you can sit in your bed at home at night, open your phone, and instantly meet someone who agrees or disagrees with you completely, instantly. But imagine that, like instant meeting of enemies. I don't think that's healthy for anyone. You know? You're just in your house, minding your own business, and now there's an enemy in your. That's a crazy way to live. I don't think we were designed for that, and I think we're paying the price, and we're seeing it. You know, there's many benefits to social media, and there's many downsides as well. It speeds up connections, both good and bad. And so, what I try and do is understand and go, do I understand you? When I fight with someone, I'll often say, let me explain you to you.
Sort of like, this is what I heard?
Yeah, I'll say, let me explain you to you. You know?
I bet when you do that sometimes, they think they sound ridiculous.
No, it's not even like that. It's just making somebody feel like you actually have heard them. I go, let me explain you to you. Before we carry on arguing, let me explain you to you. And then if I explain you back to you and you go, yes, that's what I'm saying, then I'm like, okay, then I do understand you. Now I can argue. But if I explain you back to you and you go, no, that's not what I'm saying, then I'm like, okay, then say what you mean. I think you can do this like in relationships. That's what people should do. Half the time, people are fighting, but they're not fighting. Literally, you can just look at your partner and say, is this what you're saying? And you'll be like, no, that's not what I'm saying. Then you're like, okay, wait, say it again. Is this what you're saying? No, that's not what I'm saying. Is this what you're saying? No, that's not what I'm saying. Is this what you're saying? No, that's not what I'm saying. Is this what you're saying? No, that's not what I'm saying. And you'll be shocked at how, if you fought the initial idea, then there was a fight. I think most of the fights we have as people aren't even fights. It's literally just a miscommunication between people. And then once we're in fight land, we're so proud that we don't know how to back down. And so you know what it's like. You're in a relationship, you go to someone, you said you're going to do it, why did you do that? I don't care. And then you realize that they're actually on your side, and now you have to stay angry because you just can't let it go now. You're like, well, you probably would have done that on another day. And that's why I felt that way, because you always do that. Yeah, it's all just pride and ego, you know?
It seems like you've described every marriage in the room. So, if we kind of look at your trajectory, Trevor, Born a Crime is the title of your book. Born to interracial parents in a culture where that was against the law.
Right.
You end up in the United States as a comedian, where I guess your role is being a commentator. Was it always part of your brand ambition to be that voice on those kinds of subjects? Or did it present itself and you said, all right, this is a path I'm going to walk down?
No, to answer your question, no, I didn't think that. I do believe that I was prepared for it in many ways because of my upbringing. You know, I think growing up in a family that is mixed automatically means you are learning to blend and meld worlds that don't inherently understand each other. Growing up in a country where people have been separated because of the color of their skin and their culture means that if you are in a position where you then find yourself learning how to translate and understand between groups. I think that's probably a lot of what ended up being part of my job at The Daily Show, you know, intertwined with the comedy, which is my filter on the world. But I didn't ever expect that. And I think the misconception that a lot of people would have is that it's just me parroting me, when in fact, I like that you say a voice. A voice is a part of a body, There are still eyes, there are ears, there is a brain, there are limbs, all of this is coming together. The voice is merely the output. And so I'm a byproduct of many great teachers. I'm a byproduct of many great minds. Everyone from the woman who raised me through to the wonderful people I worked with at the show, professors that I got to speak to, and fantastic authors, and people I've argued with, and people disagreed with, people I've liked, people I've disliked, whatever it is. All of that is how my brain has been formed. So I don't even think of myself as as a singular conveyor of information. I think of it rather as me being able to retain and comprehend various sources of information, and I'm able to retrieve them when I need to. And I think maybe sometimes that's what's missing in some of the conversations we have, is that we aren't always able to provide the context for some of the situations we find ourselves in. And I think oftentimes context is all that's missing. Context is what we would need to get to the other side of anything that happens to us.
Post Daily Show, how will you use your voice going forward?
That's an interesting question, because on the one hand, the first thing I've afforded myself, which was difficult, is rest. It's the first thing I wanted to do was practice resting, being able to take more time for myself, being able to take more time to see family back home. I think one of the hardest things with the Daily Show and the news cycle in America is it's perpetual, and one thing I've never enjoyed being a part of is a cycle, a response cycle. I think it's always nice to think. I grew up in a world where the news came on once a day, if you were lucky, maybe twice a day. And you know what? We didn't miss anything. It was 1 hour and that was the news. I knew what was happening in countries around the world. I knew where there were earthquakes and where there were tornadoes. I knew where there was a coup. I knew where someone was elected president. I knew where a company had gone under. I still knew. And so I think we've been tricked into believing that the instantness of knowing is real knowledge and understanding, when in fact I think processing is as important as the information itself. So now I'm on a journey of figuring out the how and the where, but I'll take my time. I don't want to rush into anything, nor do I want to do something for the sake of doing what I think I should do or what somebody thinks I should do. Because if I don't have fun, it shows on my face, and then nobody has fun with me. So I find that's what I'm really trying to get to, is a constant energy source that pushes me, because then I think in the best ways possible. I produce in the best ways possible.
Well, I think I speak for everybody in the room when I say, when you're ready to use your voice again, we'll be listening.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Trevor Miller, everybody.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you for having me. It's really wonderful. Thank you so much. Have a good night, Jeff.
That was amazing. I'm sure you were all as captivated as I was, and I'm hoping that we're all going to leave here today asking new questions, extending our hand, trying to pull people in and embrace new ideas and listen harder. That was one of the things that I took away. And I'm just so grateful to have been here. Thank you, CG. And with that, I'd love to introduce Beth Frazier, the COO of CG Medical.